So is it really the problems with these individual vaccines, or does it have something to do with these numbers? I think not only is it about the individual vaccines that we're going to spend some time going over here in a little bit, I think it's the sheer number of vaccines that kids are getting now. Because as recently as 1985, because a lot of parents will say things to me like, gosh, I have teenagers. I don't remember them getting all those vaccines. Well, they kind of didn't. I mean, as recently as 1985, they got 18 vaccines by the time they were 6 months of age and 33 by the time they were 5 years of age. And I encourage you to memorize that number too, because that's not 33 shots, that's 33 vaccines. Because MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, is 3 vaccines even though it's given in 1 shot. The polio vaccine, that's 3 different viruses. So that's 3 different vaccines given in 1 shot. DPT, diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, that's 3 vaccines even though it's given in 1 shot. So when you add up all those antigens, that's 33 vaccines by the time they're 5 years of age. Well, look what happens now. They have hepatitis B, DPT, Hib, polio, measles, mumps, chickenpox, pneumococcal vaccine, which is the Prevnar, which is like 8 vaccines in 1. Okay, and then now we're starting with this flu shot stuff. Now look what happens out here. What was happening out here? MMR all by itself at 15 months of age. Now look what happens out here. You get all this stuff together and you lay that upon the backdrop of already giving all this other stuff. Is it any wonder that a percentage of the kids' immune systems just break down and can't hold up underneath the onslaught? So when you do the math on that, now you get 51 vaccines in 15 shots by the time you're 6 months of age, and 77 in 23 shots by the time you start school, and a whopping 95 vaccines if you're starting to get the flu shot every year. Because the flu shot has 3 viruses in it. So that's 3 live viruses every year. So I encourage you to memorize those numbers too. When you say, gee, you know, our kids used to get 33 vaccines by the time they started kindergarten. Now they get 95. It's almost tripled. And it's tripled in just a little over 15-year period of time. The other thing is that there's about 20 more vaccines that they're wanting to put into the vaccination schedule by the year 2010. Most of those are going to go into the adolescent schedule, and most of them are the sexually transmitted vaccines, the sexually transmitted diseases, things like herpes and chlamydia and syphilis and gonorrhea. And there was just an article that came out last week. They've already done a trial with nurse practitioners to see whether the nurse practitioners are willing to sit down and counsel parents on the reason why they need to give their teenagers sexually transmitted disease vaccines. And the nurse practitioners are willing to do it. So that's the other thing. So now that we get past this 5-year-old thing, you're not out of the woods. They got adolescent vaccines coming down the pike. So how many kids are actually vaccinated each week? Okay, on average, there are more than 77,500 live births per week in our country. That's an average over the last 3 years. And you know, when you're involved in this information for long periods of time, like what I am, it can get pretty depressing. And so you have to keep a little bit of a sense of humor about it. And usually when I talk to like big groups of doctors or chiropractors or acupuncturists, I'll say, you know, how would you like, you know, you're all in business, you all have businesses, you see patients, you're doctors, you know, how would you like 77,000 new government guaranteed customers into your business every week? And not only are they guaranteed to buy one of your products, they're going to buy a whole bunch of your products. Government guaranteed, pushed on by the school system, pushed on by the states, and mandated in some places. Wouldn't you like to have that in your business? That's a little over 4 million new customers per year, which is actually what it comes down to. So what happens to are we having any adverse events that have been reported out of this? Well, there is a database, that's the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, that was developed, I believe it was 1986, and actually got implemented around 1991. It was part of the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. And it is a way for people to be able to report adverse events that are happening with a vaccine. It can be reported by a doctor, a nurse, a parent, a grandparent. It can be reported by anybody. So the VAERS database is sort of a bellwether, and it's sort of a thing that the CDC sort of keeps its thumb on a little bit and seeing what's happening out there in terms of the vaccine world. Now, hey, there has been an absolute analysis of this that's been done by Mark and David Geyer. They're both MDs, PhD researchers, Dr. Geyer, that they've gone in and they've analyzed this database. And one of the things that they found that since mid-1999 through January of 2004, it's a little less than 5 years, and this is for all vaccines and all reactions, there were 128,035 adverse reactions reported to VAERS. Now, that may actually represent somewhere between 1.2 million and 10.8 million actual adverse reactions, because it's estimated that only between 1 and 10% of adverse events are actually reported. Now, the adverse event can be anywhere between anything from a sore arm to high-pitched screaming to seizures to death. It can be any sort of an adverse event that's happening. But when you look at that number, even if that were the pure absolute number, 128,000 people filled out a form that said, you know, me or my kid had what I perceived to be a bad reaction from this. I'd really like to know how many bad reactions to a particular drug does it take to pull one off the market. I mean, they pulled off Reslin a couple of years ago because which was a diabetic drug, and I believe the number was about 57 adverse events of liver failure. I believe the number was 57 or somewhere in that ballpark. And they pulled that drug off the market because it was causing liver failure. Well, why do we hold vaccines to such a different standard? Why do we continue to use them until we prove that there's a problem, rather than stop using them until we prove that there's not, which we do with most other drugs? The other thing, how about deaths? Now, those were just bad reactions. When they analyzed that, there were a little over 2,000 deaths reported to VAERS, which could mean somewhere between 20,000 and 209,000 to be thought to be associated with vaccines. Shouldn't that send up a red flag that this is something that we should take a little bit seriously? Well, part of the reason is this, is that they don't pay attention to this collection system because they say it's passive. It's not active surveillance. Anybody can submit a report, and there might be 2 or 3 reports that have been submitted on one child. Like, for example, maybe the parent submitted it, and the doctor submitted it, and the grandparent submitted it. So we don't know if those numbers are really real or not. So the CDC says, kind of downplays that. The other thing is that this is a big mantra, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later too, that temporal association does not prove causality, meaning that 2 things that appear to happen at one time doesn't necessarily mean one caused the other. And that's a cornerstone argument that is like trying to, break through a brick wall. That it's just absolutely believed that vaccines are safe, effective, protective. Yes, there's a few little side effects, and the numbers are really extraordinarily small. And even in those cases, you can't absolutely say that the vaccine caused it, because those 2 things happen together are not necessarily temporal or causality events. This is like the hardest argument to get by, because it's in everything. Because, what the bottom line is that the CDC's lack of proof doesn't mean that there isn't any. And you're not going to find something you're not looking for. And what Kathy Williams used to always say about this is that what cannot be will not be. It's too big, it's too much money. So, you're not going to prove something that that is going to break down an industry. It has to be grassroots up, and that's why I'm spending my life and my time doing this.